Hey everybody, it's me again. Just going to do a quick experiment today to kind of show what the XT8 laser can do across several different wood species with some deeper etching. So typically with the 15 watt laser that I had, or even my XT50 that's 6 watts, I would do I would do font and different letters and stuff that were maybe a millimeter deep or so. But with this laser, you can really go. I've done some now that are 5 or 6 millimeters deep, so really deep, like you would do with a spindle. Only you get the nice crisp corners and everything that come with the laser. So what I thought I'd do is do a little comparison with some different wood species and try a couple of different ideas I've been wanting to try out as far as how to save some test time or some execution time, because when you run an 8 thousandths of an inch step over, which is the width of the beam on this, once your fonts start to get a little bit big, like if you're making a big sign or something, it can get, the toolpath can start to get up to take a couple hours to run, because it's, if you're doing a crosshatch fill so you can burn that down, it's stepping over so fine that it just takes forever. So what I want to try is a couple different ways to, one, to make the beam wider, and the other one to just try and step over and leave essentially a columns or several rows of really super thin wood that you can just rub out with a steel brush or something and see, do you get a good quality image or a good quality text sample after you've done something like that. That, if, for example, if I could step over at 20 thousandths instead of 8 thousandths, it would be about 2.5 times faster to run the G-code file. So we're going to try a couple things and see what they look like here, and also kind of show the general process that I do when I'm after I do the laser and I clean up the burned area a little bit with sanding and stuff like that. All right, thanks. All right, let's see how these turned out. So I did put 2 coats of finish. In this case, I used just spray lacquer. What I find is that the soot that comes off of the laser process can get in the pores. You can get it out. You can blow it out with the air compressor, and then sand it and blow it out. But I find that if you put a couple coats of whatever finish you're going to put on in the end anyway, first, before lasering, then the soot really doesn't get stuck in the pores much, and it's a lot easier to get it off. You can see, I don't know if it shows, you can kind of see there how the laser melted the surface finish there. It doesn't, it just, it kind of melts it. I've tried this on multiple different oil finishes, polyurethane, lacquer. All of this will sand off just fine. So since this isn't the final coat, and usually you want to seal up some of the soot in here anyway, it's not a big deal. So like I said, if you remember to do it, it's best to finish it first. I think just overall it saves you a little more time. So I've done 4 different hardwoods and the Baltic birch here. I tried two different things. So first of all, this laser beam is about 8 thousandths of an inch wide at the optimal focus point. Well, these are getting to be pretty big text, or pretty big font sizes, and so doing this crosshatch every 8 thousandths of an inch could make this thing run, 30-40 minutes or something like that. And I want to go faster. And the nice thing about the XT8 is it has a lot more power than you need to, even for deep engraving. So what I'm doing here is taking advantage of that. So what I did first was I set my focal point, and then I raised it up 1/2 of an inch. So I characterized the beam width here at 0 inches. So basically this is Z0. Then I raised it 100 thousandths of an inch, and then 200, 300, 400, 500. So this one's a 1/2 inch higher. So you can see progressively how the beam goes from about 8 or 9 thousandths wide to roughly 24 thousandths wide. And this is pretty low power. I think I was only running 15% power here yet, and it's still cut pretty deep into that wood. So what that means is we can run a higher Z height, intentionally bringing the laser out of focus, make the beam a little bit wider, or in this case almost 3 times wider, crank up the power a little bit more to get the same depth, and then we don't have to do a step over every, say, 7 or 8 thousandths to fill in this crosshatch. We can move over to 20 thousandths, so it cuts the execution time down by about a third in this case. So I tried that first here, and you can see the sapele is pretty charred along the edges. I think the reason for this charring is because the laser, when it's defocused, the beam gets kind of inconsistent at the edge. So the power level is enough to burn, but not, basically enough to discolor, but not enough to actually remove the material. And so it kind of ends up charring the edge. So what I did then on the walnut, maple, cherry, all of these other ones, I went to the optimal focal point, and you can see that the material is, hopefully comes across here. You can kind of see the surface of the material didn't get burnt down because I was stepping over at 24 thousandths of an inch step over, but my beam in this case is only 8 thousandths wide. So it left a little row essentially of standing columns in here. So if I rub this, now I rubbed that out, and you can see that those fell out. So I think it's actually better to keep the focus optimized, do the step over, and then just rub these out. So I'm going to go ahead now and rub these with, kind of go through my normal process here. I'm going to put the camera back up on the stand and show you what I normally do after lasering this to clean this up and get it presentable again. So the first thing that I typically will do is I'll use one of these little stainless steel brushes and just rub down in the hole here. And you can see these aren't really pieces of ash. These are tiny little columns of wood that was standing up there because, again, I had a 8 thousandths wide beam, but I was stepping over at 24, so kind of left that all spiked up in there. But I can just scrub that out with this brush. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stop the camera and just rub all of these out first. Okay, now I have kind of rubbed out all those pits, and I'm going to sand all of these to clean them up. All right, so I sanded these. In the case of the cherry and the maple, they were a little harder to get out. They were stained heavier, so because they're lighter woods. So I had to sand with 220 grit and then 600, and then I sprayed over all of these. So you can see these are nice and crisp letters. These are about 3.5 inches wide. This font here is a little bit smaller. The walnut's great. Cherry looks good. The sapelli was the one that, this is the side that I had to set to the optimal focal point, so right at Z0, whereas this side is the one that I raised up 1/2 inch to try to get some overlap. So 2 things to note. The edges are still kind of charred and burned. I couldn't sand that out. And it also didn't burn nearly as deep. It's only about half as deep. You can probably see on this side it's maybe 1 millimeter deep, and here it's maybe 2 or 3 millimeters deep. Maybe it doesn't come over the camera very well. So the different woods were pretty consistent as far as like light woods and the walnut and sapele. With the fine focal point, I got very crisp results and about the same depth. So I was running 50 inches per minute, 60% power, with the 20 thousandths overlap. So I think that's kind of highlights the trade-offs on speed versus quality. You can see, for example, on the maple, if you look, you can kind of see the crosshatch pattern in the bottom of this because again the beam is only 8 thousandths wide, and I stepped over at 20. When I chipped those little columns out, it left the bottom of this kind of rough and light and dark spots. So if you want the ultimate quality, you really want to run at a step over that's like right around your beam width, or even a little bit smaller, so that you get solid overlap and you burn every little last bit of area out. And the other nice thing about that is you don't have to go and chip out nearly as much stuff. The bottom ends up a lot flatter and a more even color. The downside is it takes a lot longer, just because you're covering every little area of that. Whereas with these, I think at a distance this looks great. Especially on the darker colors, you don't notice, because the walnut and sapele and even the cherry for the most part, you don't see that light and dark contrast in the bottom from breaking out those little columns that were left over. So I think that's a pretty good trade-off in time if you're in production and you want to speed up your tool path a little bit to increase your step over. But like I said, if you make that a small step over, then you have a little bit less work to clean that out later. In fact, just an air compressor will clean that out really well without too much brushing. So, and then this sapele, and it's probably not just the sapele. I would say defocusing too far just doesn't leave a high enough intensity beam left to make nice crisp edges. So I probably wouldn't recommend. You could do it maybe 100 or 200 thousandths, but definitely not 1/2 inch high. That was a real time saver, but it also dropped the quality quite a bit, so I don't think I'd recommend that. But this one here is good. So anyway, this was only 60% power, and I was running really fast. I mean, 50 inches per minute is just fast. So this laser, I have done 5 or 6 millimeter deep burns with this. All you gotta do is crank the power up a little bit more, slow down a little bit more, do a little bit more overlap, and you can make this 1/2 inch deep if you really want to. The laser has plenty of power for that. So hope that was helpful to show across what the deep burns look like across some different woods. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I always answer them. Thank you.